we've all heard that history is written by the victors. And for 2 centuries, the story of Britain's conquest of India has hinged on one famous event, the Battle of Plassey. It's the story we were all taught in school, of a dramatic victory in 1757 that supposedly laid the foundation for British rule in India. But that story, as it turns out, is a brilliant piece of historical misdirection. What if I told you the battle that truly handed India to the British wasn't the one you know? Forget Plassey. The real turning point, the day a corporation really did conquer a subcontinent, was the Battle of Buxar. This isn't just a story about a battle, it's about how a simple dispute over trade profits led to a bloody showdown that would seal India's fate for the next 200 years. To get why Buxar was the real game changer, we have to look at the lie of Plassey. Back in 1757, the British East India Company, led by Robert Clive, didn't so much win a battle as they cooked up a conspiracy. They bribed a key commander, Mir Qasim, to have his army stand down, and the battle was over before it really started. The result wasn't direct British rule, it was a puppet regime. The company got exactly what it wanted, a friendly Nawab, Mir Qasim, on the throne of Bengal, which happened to be the richest province in India. They figured they had the perfect setup, indirect control, huge profits, and none of the headaches of actually governing. But a puppet is only useful if it does what you want, and the company's bottomless greed quickly became impossible to satisfy. The constant demand for money was draining Bengal's treasury dry. Mir Qasim, unable to pay up, started secretly plotting with the Dutch. The company found out, and in 1760, they simply kicked him out and installed his son-in-law, Mir Qasim, as the new Nawab. They thought they were just swapping one puppet for another. They had no idea what was coming. Mir Qasim was nobody's puppet. He was sharp, ambitious, and dead set on making his office independent again. One of his first moves was to pack up his capital and move it from Murshidabad, a city crawling with company officials, to Munger, a much more strategic and defensible spot. There, he started acting like a real ruler. He overhauled his administration, fixed the broken tax system, and began building a modern, professional army with help from European mercenaries. But his boldest move was challenging the very source of the company's power, its shady trade privileges. For years, the company had been abusing a royal permit, called a dastak, that let them trade goods without paying local taxes. Company officials were illegally using these free passes for their own private businesses, running local merchants into the ground and cheating the Nawab out of massive amounts of revenue. When the British refused to stop, Mir Qasim did something incredible. He abolished the transit taxes for everyone, putting Indian and British merchants on the exact same level. This was an outrage to the company. Their business model wasn't based on trade, it was based on unfair trade. A level playing field was a declaration of war. Things escalated fast. A series of ugly skirmishes broke out in 1763, and even with his new army, Mir Qasim was defeated and driven out of Bengal. He was a deposed ruler with nothing left to lose. But instead of just disappearing, he did something unprecedented. He fled west to the neighboring kingdom of Awadh and put together a grand alliance. And this wasn't just some disgruntled ex-Nawab anymore. He was joined by Shuja'ud-Dawla, the powerful ruler of Awadh, and, most importantly, by the Mughal Emperor himself, Shah Alam II. For the first time, the major powers of northern India were united against a common enemy, the arrogant foreign corporation that was messing in their politics and sucking their lands dry. The stage was set for a final showdown. This wouldn't be a fixed fight like Plassey. This was going to be an all-out war between the East India Company and the combined might of India's old guard. On October 22, 1764, the armies clashed near the town of Buxar, on the banks of the Ganges River. On paper, this should have been a slaughter. The Indian alliance had a massive army, somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 men. Facing them was a tiny company force of about 7,000, led by Major Hector Munro. A big chunk of Munro's army was made up of Indian soldiers, or sepoys, but they were drilled relentlessly in brutal, European-style warfare. The battle kicked off at dawn. The Indian forces charged, trying to use their sheer numbers to crush the British lines. But this supergroup had a fatal flaw: they couldn't get their act together. Mir Qasim, Shuja'ud-Dawla, and the Emperor were all in it for themselves, not fighting as one unified force. Hector Munro, a tough Scottish soldier, used this disunity against them perfectly. He locked his troops into disciplined formations that weathered the first chaotic assault. His artillery was positioned brilliantly, ripping bloody holes in the advancing Indian ranks. But the real key was the discipline and firepower of the British infantry. Their steady, terrifying volleys of musket fire shattered charge after charge. A British detachment then managed to swing around the flank, surrounding the Indian army and causing a total panic. By noon, it was all over. A complete and total rout. The Great Indian Alliance was broken. Shujah-ud-Dawla actually blew up his own boat bridge to cover his retreat, leaving thousands of his own soldiers, and the Mughal Emperor, stranded. Mir Qasim fled the battlefield, eventually dying broke and forgotten a few years later. The British lost fewer than 1,000 men, while the Indian side suffered thousands of casualties. At Buxar, the East India Company hadn't just beaten a Nawab. They had crushed the combined forces of the Mughal establishment. And this is where the real meaning of Buxar snaps into focus. The victory at Plassey gave the British influence. The victory at Buxar gave them power. In the aftermath, the defeated Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II had no other cards to play. In 1765, he was forced to sign the Treaty of Allahabad. The terms of this treaty didn't just shift the balance of power, they changed what the East India Company was. The emperor granted the company the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The Diwani was the imperial right to collect all taxes and run the civil justice system. Let that sink in, a foreign trading company was now the official government and tax collector for over 20 million people in India's richest regions. This was the moment the company went from being traders to being rulers. It was the start of a new kind of colonialism. The Mughal emperor, theoretically the sovereign of India, was now a pensioner of the company, living on an allowance in a city the British gave him, his authority gone in all but name. The Nawab of Awadh became a dependent ally, forced to pay a crushing war debt and foot the bill for company troops to protect him. The money from the Diwani would now pay for the company's armies, allowing them to fund the conquest of the rest of India over the next century. Buxar wasn't just a battle, it was the formal, legal beginning of company rule in India. History is full of these hidden stories, the real turning points that get buried by simpler myths. If you love digging up the truth, you know what to do. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives that challenge the history we think we know. So, when did British rule in India really begin? The answer isn't in the backroom deals and conspiracies of Plassey, but on the bloody field of Buxar. It was here that sheer military power, not political scheming, proved British dominance. It was the Treaty of Allahabad that followed, giving the company the legitimacy, the authority, and, most importantly, the money to build an empire. This one battle cast a 200-year shadow over the subcontinent, turning a commercial venture into an imperial one and starting India's long, painful colonial chapter. It was the day a corporation became a conqueror.